Now we're going to close out on a sinister story making its way to the Supreme Court about reinstituting or allowing states to reinstitute conversion therapy. Courtesy of NBC News, the Supreme Court takes up challenge to Colorado conversion therapy ban. The Supreme Court on Monday agreed to hear a challenge to a law in Colorado that bans conversion therapy aimed at young people questioning their sexual orientation or gender identity. With more than 20 states with similar bans, the court's eventual ruling is likely to have nationwide implications, much like it did with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The justices took up an appeal brought by Kaylee Childs, a Christian therapist, who argued that the restriction violates her free speech rights under the Constitution's First Amendment. Favored by religious conservatives, the practice is aimed at encouraging gay or lesbian minors to change their sexual orientations and transgender children to identify as the gender identities assigned to them at birth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're a Christian, aren't you supposed to abide by the belief that God made everybody in their image, or in his I just made God non-binary. Aren't you supposed to believe that God made everybody in his image? If God created me and wanted me to have, and God created me, have big ears and a unibrow, is that his intention? Is it blasphemous for me to shave my unibrow to a Christian? If a child is born gay, is that not how God created them? Christian values just so often deviate from actual Christianity. It feels like Childs often asks clients who are Christians, some of whom have questions about their sexual orientation and gender identity, amid concerns that they are unable to live their lives in accordance with their faith, according to court papers. Again, it comes back to one of the prominent teachings of Christianity. God created man in his image. As such, they seek counseling to suppress unwanted sexual actions or to try to resolve conflicts about their gender identity. I'm gonna, spoiler alert here. Conversion therapy does not work. It leads to tremendous adverse outcomes when it is attempted. There are numerous studies that cite this. I actually have another tab opened up from Cornell that did a meta-analysis of 13 studies, and we'll read it, that came to the conclusion that conversion therapy has higher risks of mental illness. For example, it leads to depression, anxiety, because you are trying to convince somebody that they are not who they are. You are trying to alter the identity of a human being who is already dealing with tremendous negativity, potentially, in their personal life. They feel that they are committing a sin by being gay or being trans, which is not true. You were intended to be this way for a reason. This is who you are. This is so insidious because it teaches young people not to accept themselves, and a lack of acceptance among people in the LGBT community leads to more suicides, again, more depression, more anxiety. It is horrible to try to institute that on young people, especially as a medical professional. This is akin to medical malpractice. Quote, the government has no business censoring private conversations between clients and counselors, nor should a counselor be used as a tool to impose the government's biased views on her clients, said Kristen Wagoneer, president of Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative Christian advocacy group representing Childs. Childs' lawyers cite, in part, the Supreme Court's 2018 ruling that struck down on free speech grounds a California law that required anti-abortion pregnancy clinics to notify clients about abortion access. The lawyers argue that the bans have, quote, devastating real-world consequences, including on rare cases of, quote, detransitioners, the small proportion of transgender people who change course and wish to identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, which is like literally 0.1% of trans people. It might even be less than that. Limiting counseling options communicates to, quote, countless minors that they have no choice but to medically transition, the lawyer said. Dude, 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 when a child experiences gender dysphoria, their primary care or their pediatrician and their psychiatrist have to agree that they are experiencing gender dysphoria, which, by the way, is a legitimate medical condition that every prominent medical journal agrees is worthy of medical care. The care options are then between the doctor, the child, and the child's parent or guardian. It is a legitimate medical condition. Colorado officials wrote in their belief that the state measure regulates conduct, not speech. Quote, states have long regulated medical practices to protect patients from harmful professional conduct. Yeah, aka medical malpractice, which is why if you fucking die, if your doctor kills you, they can lose their medical license. Quote, Colorado's law protecting young people from unscientific and cruel gay conversion therapy practices is human, smart, and appropriate. Again, yeah, there is actual scientific evidence that says conversion therapy just does not work. A federal judge and the Denver-based 10th District... okay, let's try this again. A federal judge and the Denver-based 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals both ruled in favor of the state. The Supreme Court has on several occasions refused to take up challenges to similar conversion therapy bans, most recently in December 23 when it left a law in Washington state in place. 3 conservative justices said at the time they would have taken up the case. The new case will be argued and decided in the court's next term, which starts in October and ends in June 2026. As mentioned, courtesy of... This is like actually the worst fucking design website I think I've ever seen. Courtesy of Cornell University, what we know. What does the scholarly research say about whether conversion therapy can alter sexual orientation without causing harm? Overview. We identified 47 peer-reviewed studies that met our criteria for adding to knowledge about whether conversion therapy can alter sexual orientation without causing harm. 13 of those studies, including primary research. Of those, 12 concluded that CT is ineffective and or harmful. 12 concluded that CT is ineffective and or harmful, finding links to depression, suicidality, anxiety, social isolation, and decreased capacity for intimacy. Only one study concluded that sexual orientation change efforts could succeed, although only in a minority of participants, and the study has several limitations. Its entire sample self-identified as religious, and it is based on self-reports which can be biased and unreliable. Shout out to science. Shout out to science, because this was replicated 12 times. And the one time it wasn't, there were flaws in the study. The remaining 34 studies do not make an empirical determination about whether CT can alter sexual orientation, but may offer useful observations to help guide practitioners who treat LGBT patients. The research on conversion therapy is limited by the difficulty of empirically assessing a person's sexual orientation. All of the studies we identified rely on self-reports, and those who wish to change their sexual orientation enough to seek therapeutic intervention may be inclined toward a bias in assessing or reporting their own attractions. Most of the studies lacked control groups, and none used nationally representative probability samples. Many researchers sympathetic to conversion therapy do not actually assess changes in sexual orientation or arousal patterns, but in behavior, which is not a true gauge of orientation. Some subjects who claimed movement from gay to straight are actually much more Some subjects who claimed movement from gay to straight are actually more accurately described as bisexual, but were not initially coded as such. Many of these studies sample exclusively religious populations, and so their conclusions generally reflect more about religious self-identifications than any indication that sexual orientation can genuinely change. Some researchers found success in depressing same-sex arousal, often with the use of severe techniques, but often that did not translate into increased heterosexual arousal or ability to sustain a satisfying opposite sex relationship. Now, the remainder of this is extensive. I'm not going to read the entire thing because we would be here forever. However, after reviewing the research, we concluded that there is no credible evidence that sexual orientation can be changed through therapeutic intervention. Most accounts of such change are akin to instances of quote unquote faith healing. There is also powerful evidence that trying to change a person's sexual orientation can be extremely harmful. Taken together, the overwhelming consensus among psychologists and psychiatrists who have studied conversion therapy or treated patients who are struggling with their sexual orientations that therapeutic intervention cannot change sexual orientation, a positive echoed by all major professional organizations in the field, including the American Psychological Association, whose substantial 2009 report is available here. And then it just the remainder of the page is just links to all of the studies, so we're not gonna fucking go through all these studies one by one because we know conversion therapy simply does not work. And any mental health professional looking to practice it, looking to implement it on one of their patients, is practicing medical malpractice